Jayne! Cats.
Yeah, that's the downside. We've got 3 of them.
Nice. What a beautiful cat.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.
When I got into newspapers, that's when the passion really developed for photography. And I can't say that it was singularly the photography so much as the whole situation. So, you know, it became so exciting to be involved in frontline news. And so the satisfaction of being involved in that, having inside information on what was going on, seeing your picture then in the paper the next day, that became a real driving force.
Real rush.
Really, yeah. It's something, and something that you never get over. If you've got that, you never get over it.
Oh,
you
wow.
always have it for life.
Jayne, Russell, thank you for inviting me into your home. I love seeing how people live, and also a photographer's home is always a little interesting.
There's always a messy room. There's always something. Where's all the camera gear?
I love that, you thankfully agreed to do the self-portrait by the massive. Wait, is this a cupboard or is this basically?
Yeah, it's I remember when I bought it. It's a beautiful Baltic pine antique cupboard. And I walked into the store and I thought, I've got to have that. And I was living in a Victorian house in London. And I was walking out the door mumbling to myself saying, I'd have that, except there's no way it'd fit into my house. And the woman overheard me and she said, no, it all comes apart.
Nice.
So it's all in bits. So it's a massive cupboard that's been everywhere with us because you can take it apart and then put it back together and then put everything in it.
And so for the people listening, okay, we're sitting in your dining room. It's a lot of wood. So it's wood floors, wood table, wood benches, wood shoe cabinets, wood. And then you have this massive piece. It looks like there's a cello sitting at the top.
It's
a double bass. Okay, sitting at the top, like just kind of prop. This is just to give you a sense of how massive it is.
Yeah.
And then you're just like, oh, do you want to see my camera gear?
Yeah.
I'm like, sure. And then the doors open. And it's basically like doors to Narnia. It's just like you open it and then it's just like,
it is.
Look at all this stuff.
I have tried to label and organize and everything because,
there's too much.
You think, oh, I need that particular piece. You've got to go in and get it. Otherwise, you've got a massive storage problem, haven't you? I mean, it's nice when you've got a studio.
You are
but
amazing.
For my type of job, we don't have a studio.
Yeah.
But, to have a studio where you've got nice shelves and everything's in boxes and everything's a dream.
Right.
But here it's all hanging and got tags on it and everything.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But yeah, you need to be able to put your hand in there and find exactly what you want in a short space of time.
Okay, so from your accent, I would say you're from Peru. Right?
Yes, yeah, clearly. Yeah, so I'm from Sydney.
Australia.
Okay,
I'm Sydney, Peru. Okay, Sydney, Australia.
But I left a long time ago.
Right.
I left in 1992.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but I think there's a lot of Australians in Hong Kong,
Sure.
and I think I got my accent back because I went from Australia to London. I was working in London for nearly 20 years.
As a photojournalist. Wow.
And in fact, that's all I ever did. So I worked for newspapers in Australia, went to England to work at Fleet Street to go to the best of the best.
Right.
But when you're working for those newspapers, you're doing all sorts of things. So you're doing fashion, you're doing on location.
Yeah.
The practices that you've got are really, really useful. Because when I came here, it became pretty evident that there was a very small pool of photojournalists working in Hong Kong.
Right. So this is the perfect, you've done this before. You know what you're doing. You've been around news and storytelling and all this stuff. So you have given me the absolute perfect segue into the first image. The image is the floor has like this emerald green carpeting of sorts. And then there's a sofa, and then there's a kind of a bench, and then there's a very kind of oldish in the British style lamp, again tastefully green, whites, color. On the wall is gold framed. The walls are white. There's a fireplace, which actually seems to have a real fire going in it. And there's this beautiful kind of metallic, could be gold-plated something, clock with a large mirror. And dead center in the image, in perfect, exquisite composition, is a rather elderly woman kind of looking askance at a well-dressed man who's got his hands behind his back. He's wearing well, not a three-piece suit, but, he's wearing a nice suit. These people, I think, are famous. The woman's wearing a kind of a very stodgy, she's older, so she's wearing a grandma skirt with a sort of grandma cardigan and a nice shirt. She looks very elegant. Nice shock of gray hair. But she's looking at him like, hey, what are you going on about? These two people, who are they and what was the situation?
Right, this is not a normal living room.
Okay.
This is the garden room that overlooks the Queen Victoria's gardens in Balmoral in Scotland.
Oh.
So that is the Queen in the middle, Queen Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm.
And she's meeting with the then Premier of Victoria. From Australia, Victoria, Australia.
Ah, okay.
She goes up to Balmoral for several months a year, and no business is ever conducted at Balmoral. Mm-hmm. It is a family home, hence she's looking really relaxed.
Right.
She never invites dignitaries. She never does any business. She will come back down to London if she needs to do anything. That is a totally private home. But that year, in the year preceding, there was massive bushfires in Victoria that had a horrendous death toll.
Yeah.
And she just out of the blue summoned the Premier of Victoria to find out what had happened in the last year. And so he was invited up to Balmoral just to have a private meeting with her, which is just extremely unusual. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so the situation was also unusual for us. If you, with the royals, when you're working in newspapers in England, you're on a rota system, and you all take it in turns. So when they need a videographer or a photographer, they don't have all the press in there. They just have a rota, and they'll have one photographer and one video person come into the...
No pressure.
No pressure. And then you give it away to free to everybody else that wants it. You can't pick and choose your jobs.
Yeah.
So if you refuse a job, then you're dropped from the next good job. So as a group of newspapers, you have to do all of them. You have to do all the minor ones and the major ones. So you might get a good one. You might also get a really minor royal doing something very minor. But this was out of the system because they only allowed Australian media in.
Oh, okay.
So we did one photographer and one camera video person.
Wow.
When you go and meet the Queen, when you deal with the Queen in Buckingham Palace in London, everyone has to be in place in the room before she arrives.
Right.
So you're waiting.
Yeah.
This was the odd one.
Okay.
We came in and she's standing by the window overlooking the gardens that Queen Victoria planted.
Like a normal human being.
Like a normal human being with a couple of corgis round her feet. It was just like, it was a stereotype in a way.
Nice.
And she's so relaxed. She's in her country kind of attire.
Yeah.
And then she just started speaking to everyone as though completely normal. There was one aide that obviously had in their mind that you had to be in and out. You had to be finished in a short amount of time because they were just doing this photo opportunity. But the Premier had turned up with this special piece of tartan that he'd specially Victorian tartan that he'd wanted to present to her. And so I had to say, and the assistant saying, time to go. I'm going, we can't, because the point was that he talk about the bushfires, and he's got a beautiful book of all these, before and after pictures of things that had happened in the bushfire. So that's what I need. So that's why it's slightly side on, because we're being slightly moved out the door, and I'm going, no, we can't go.
Ah, okay.
So they did stop, but I like that because it's a bit more relaxed than the one with the book. The Queen's then looking into the book and you can't see her as much.
Right.
But it was an unusual experience, like a very unique experience.
Right.
I mean, of of a lot of the guys that work in Fleet Street. There'd be very few that would ever have gone through those front doors.
Right. Podcast recording is an exercise in chaos theory because as we're speaking, you have your 3 beautiful cats who are kind of hopping around on the tables, on the benches. We can sort of hear them, so that's going
to... Random noises of them jumping on
It's great because they're looking around going like, well, I don't care. This is my place. And as I can hear the Hong Kong's national bird in the background. The drilling.
Yeah. I thought you were actually meaning the koel.
No.
We've got a beautiful koel.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if that's the way you pronounce it correctly. And he starts calling out at 5:05 in the morning.
Yeah, no, the best.
And he sits right in the middle of a tree in the middle of the buildings, and it just echoes everywhere.
Have you read Haruki Murakami?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. I don't know if that's the bird that he is actually referencing, but my wife and I, when we hear that bird, to us, it's a wind-up bird because you're going to think he's going to go higher and higher until his head begins to explode.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like that because it does. It goes higher, 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 higher till it stops.
Yeah, it's amazing. So to the listener, I'm very sorry if the drilling is seeping in. Terribly disrespectful. We're talking about the Queen. Are we not? Yeah, it's gotta be unreal, surreal that you're sent on these jobs as part of your job, and you're a witness, and you got the camera, and you're put in these positions that, as somebody, for example, my client is a very well-respected, super sought-out, kind of famous person in Hong Kong as a business leader. He's done incredible things. So he's got these accomplishments, and because I'm working with him, I get invited to these meetings with very high, like billionaires and all this stuff. And it's kind of surreal. I'm just okay.
And you're sitting back going, is this real?
Yeah.
I'm really here in this front room with the Queen.
Yeah, great.
And she really talks to you.
Right.
Like, that was the thing. Actually speaking to the Queen, it was like, whoa.
Because your brain is kind of dealing with the fact that you've got this physical human being in front of you, and then you're also filtering it through the lens of the history of... Yeah. I made fun in terms of how I set it up, but clearly I knew that was a queen, and...
Yes.
Okay, let's go to the next photo. I haven't looked at these. You sent them.
Okay.
I downloaded them, and I haven't looked at them.
Oh, okay.
I just looked at the thumbnail, and I said, "Oh, this is going to be good," because I don't, because I wanted
you get a fresh impression.
Yeah,
as well.
for sure.
Good idea.
Okay. So, in this photograph, a completely different feeling. It's beautiful black and white. It looks very urban, poor. There's there's a man holding a baby on his lap. He's holding a bottle of what is probably beer in his hand. He's sitting on a sofa that's outside. It looks like naga hide or not real leather. The paint's peeling off the walls. The door, it looks very gritty and grimy. The floor is just concrete. It's very, very, it's not very soft. Other than the two humans in the image, nothing else is alive. You've got the bottles, you've got the concrete, the wall, door, sofa, the metal grating on the windows. It's very urban. It's very rough. Beautiful face. So the man has this really dark, shock of hair, and the girl has really nice thick hair. She looks probably 2 years old. It looks kind of cool outside. I wouldn't say this is the Philippines. This is kind of like a kind of poverty that is Western, because there's graffiti on the walls that's kind of Western lettering. Beyond that, it's very... What is he holding in his hand? Bottle. Victoria Bitters. So there we go. So what's this photo?
You're right about it being urban poverty, but it's a different type. It's in Australia, it's Sydney.
Oh.
And the problem is, it's a long-term problem that's existed of Aboriginals in urban environments, because there's traditionally lower education, nothing for them to do, poor employment, and doesn't matter what they were doing at the time. It was just it created an environment where a lot of the Aboriginals would sit around and drink. Things have changed now, but this is in the late 80s in Sydney.
Okay.
And there was a famous street called Everleigh Street, and the Aboriginal Housing Association had got some old Victorian houses and had renovated them.
Okay.
And moved families in. But then that was great for a short period of time, but without anything for anyone to do.
Yeah.
It slowly deteriorated and became actually quite derelict.
Mm-hmm.
So in the end, it was basically two ends of the street, and no one would go into the street except those that lived there or were Aboriginal that, knew people in there.
Okay.
The police wouldn't go down the street.
Oh, wow.
So as things started to deteriorate and, drunken incidents happened, and then they decided, they started destroying their environment. But it's not that simple a deal of just give people a row of houses and expect that solves all the problems.
Sure.
And so they realised that since then. And now any sort of deal to try and help urban Aborigines is far more comprehensive kind of arrangement. But it was an interesting experiment in a sense that didn't work. And they decided that the only way to deal with the past of how detrimental the memory was of Everleigh Street was to raze it to the ground.
Oh, okay.
So the housing, it was owned by the Aboriginal Housing Association. And so they took the move to actually they purchased further streets around it and then built a different environment, but more importantly built
like the infrastructure.
A lot of infrastructure around it.
Huh.
So it's a lot more different. But the education still remains a problem.
Sure.
There's definitely a much higher profile for how to deal with getting the kids educated and keeping an eye on giving them a chance. It's a much more, we're far more advanced in 30 years.
Yeah.
But that was just a dreadful, they really just didn't know what to do.
Right. So professionally, your role and over time, your eye and your aesthetic, connection, philosophy, all that stuff is maturing, and you're sent into these different environments, and in a way, I'm trying to imagine what would be like for me, and it's kind of like, okay, you're assigned to go here, so you go there, and as you go, you're forced to learn on the fly.
Yeah.
Like you're forced to kind of.
You're also forced to confront the fact that you would never walk down that street.
Mm-hmm.
You believe everything you hear about the police, that even the police don't go down there.
Right.
And yet you know that this has to be recorded, and so you want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And quite sadly, in the 1980s, that so few people went down there, and then a consequence of digitalising everything that was shot in those days of black and white film has meant that there's virtually no pictures of it.
Oh, okay.
So I have 3 pictures that I took of Everleigh Street because I printed them up.
Right.
So I had to digitalise off the print.
Yeah.
And I'd done them as 12/16s for a portfolio. So they came out quite well as a picture.
Mm-hmm.
But the company that I worked for at the time had decided that when they were digitalising all the negs, they would only digitalise negs from images that had been used in the paper.
Huh.
So basically, virtually everything was thrown away.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So that's a lesson also in filing your own things and not relying on anyone else to file your own images.
Sure.
It's a different situation now where you're all digital anyway. So
yeah,
you're always running it through a computer. But in those days when you just got the physical negs and then you're handing those negatives over to the company to store.
Right. Let's get really nerdy. You mostly shoot full frame, equivalent 35 millimeter. Yep. Do you have larger format cameras, or that's it?
I did. For years I had Mamiya RB67, the old manual film cameras.
Yeah.
Because I did a lot of fashion.
Okay.
Not that it wasn't high magazine glossy fashion, but it was more catalogue kind of fashion, but it was for the newspapers.
Yeah.
So more down to earth fashion.
Right.
High street fashion is probably the right way of saying it. But we did spend a lot of money on shooting it. Mm-hmm. So I would do it on the 6.7 to give it a bit of quality. I mean, I went down to Cape Town, for instance, and because you're working for newspapers and not working for magazines, you've got a much shorter lead time. So if you're shooting something for the summer and you go down to Cape Town, you can shoot it and have it in the next week's paper. Yeah. But, if you went down to Cape Town, we'd shoot 8 different things so you could run it over the next few weeks. Right. But it was because we were working for newspapers, it was great because the magazines would, I don't know if you know, but a lot of the European models will head down to Cape Town in the off season because you get the weather. The water is absolutely freezing cold. Okay. But you get the sun and, it looks like it's summer. Okay. And it's so much cheaper than going to other locations. Okay. So you're in the southern hemisphere. And so you get the opposite. So it's winter in Europe, summer down there. You do all the summer catalogues and then the models head back up to Europe for the summer up there again. Okay. But they have to do it with such a lead time that at the end of their season down there, they're kind of coming to the end of any of the good magazine jobs. Right. And they're sitting around. Okay. So the quality of the models that you get towards the end of the season, you would never be able to hire them if you were trying to get them in London. Okay. For a newspaper. You'd never get them for a newspaper. Okay. So it was fabulous. I got some great models and great locations and everything. But all shot on the film and all shot on the RB67. Fascinating. But at the time that I was thinking about digital and whether it was possible to afford going for a digital back on that same type of camera, the costs was just so high. Yeah. You were talking about £25,000, so that's in the region of 250,000 Hong Kong dollars. Yeah. Back then, back in say the year 2000. Sure. Wow. So it was just not a choice. I said if I were doing this every day, then I would invest in how I'd move forward. Sure. But I wasn't doing it every day, so we changed to just doing it on 35, everything on 35, which is a shame because in the early days of 35 digital. Obviously, the quality was appalling. Yeah. It was just, you look back at the file size and you could have taken a pencil and drawn it better. Yeah. It's just, but it was a revolution for newspapers. Huh. So,
you'd mentioned earlier that, do you know Julia Broad?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
So that was really interesting.
Oh, okay.
Very interesting. But no, I don't. Never come across them.
It's just a different sector, a different part of town, a different whatever you want to call it. Yeah. But okay, but yeah, quite fascinating. Cool. Let's go to the next image. So this one is now I can sort of anchor it a little bit better because I recognize the building type. So it looks like it's in say Kowloon side of Hong Kong, and there are what looks like, that's a good one. Okay, so on the right of this, so the scene in the background is, it's a black and white photo. It's the buildings, sort of intense, sort of older style buildings, so a lot of windows that are broken up into small squares. Though it looks like either really early in the morning or a Sunday when everything's shuttered. On the ground, there's that same look right thing painted on the actual ground, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people standing. So you're making a portrait of 7 people. The groups are separated. Like on the left, there's like what looks like a grandmother, a mother holding up her daughter, and then I guess the husband, maybe could be a brother, and then on the right you have a man holding up his daughter with, I'm assuming, his spouse. Yeah, I can guess what the story is because of what the faces look like. Some look Chinese, some look South Asian. But what is the story of this photo?
This is Hong Kong, quite rightly, and yes, in Kowloon side, so round Yamate. And the story was about Edward Snowden. after Edward Snowden left.
Wow.
So these people are refugees. And whenever, at the end of the Edward Snowden incident, you know, he released all his story through The Guardian. He was sitting in the Mirror Hotel. And then once that story dropped, then the whole city is alive with trying to find him.
Right.
And everyone's assuming that he's 5-starring it somewhere, he's in a luxury accommodation somewhere. So people are looking at the most bizarre places, like the boat owned by the Icelandic honorary consul in the harbour down in Aberdeen, I think it was. Private locations.
Right.
Private consular locations. Just no one had any idea.
Yeah.
No one had any idea. But what had happened is his barrister had thought, how can we work this? So he went to the UNHCR to register Edward Snowden as a refugee.
Right.
So he thought also, then what's the next step? How could he completely disappear where no one would find him? And that is to be placed with refugees.
Okay.
So he took Edward Snowden and took him up to Shamshepo to one of this particular barrister was looking after several families and their appeals as to whether they were allowed to stay in Hong Kong or not. So he took him and placed him with one of the refugee families.
Wow.
And literally they moved out of their it was a family. It was the family on the right. Mm-hmm. They also now have a younger son since Edward Snowden came to stay. And they were in a 1-bedroom, like it's a single bed.
Yeah, those tiny places.
Super tiny place. They moved out of that 1-bedroom and they then lived in the kind of kitchenette thing in the hallway while Edward Snowden took their bedroom and then they went out and got newspapers for him. They got all the electronic equipment that he needed. He basically made a list and then they went out and got all the wireless communication and everything for Edward to stay in communication. But then the barrister was concerned that at some point something might leak out.
Sure.
Why is this? Why are they buying this equipment? Everyone's watching everyone's business in these tight communal kind of accommodations in Shamshepo. So they decided that they'd move on. Mm-hmm. So they moved on to Ajit's house.
Okay.
And Ajit is an ex-soldier, a Sri Lankan soldier.
Okay.
So they felt that actually they'd leave him with Ajit because if they had to then have problems with moving around, then Ajit was by himself and would be able to probably help more. Yeah. So, and it was also, it was still Ajit's still in a single bed accommodation, but for two of them to be in there, it was much easier.
Wow.
So, and then the rest of the picture is, Vanessa also partially lived in with this other couple, kind of in the subdivided section. So it's all right on top of each other. And that was Vanessa's mother that was also here, but she's gone back to the Philippines.
So Vanessa
has now, with her daughter Kiana, has been given asylum in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah. So she's gone already.
Okay. Wow.
The rest of them are still here. The rest of them were all at the point of being ready to go. Right. At that last stage of acceptance to Canada, right at the beginning of COVID.
Right. Okay.
And that just shut down everything.
Sure.
Shut down. It shut down communications back to Sri Lanka where they need to get paperwork from. Yeah. It shut down the operations of the government departments here, and so they're in a bit of a limbo now. They're still waiting.
So, as a working photojournalist in COVID, are you traveling at all, or
no, not at all.
So you've just been in Hong Kong for how long?
The last trip I had was March last year.
Okay, me too.
Yeah, which is unusual because, normally, for me, based here, I'm not just... Because when I came to Hong Kong, it was clear that I needed either 2 or 3 languages to be working necessarily in the local media.
Yeah.
So the only media work I eventually did when I got here was for overseas. So I worked for agencies overseas.
Okay.
But the location and the type of news that was coming out of Hong Kong would mean that actually there wasn't that much going on for foreign agencies. You would be talking about celebrities and sports being the things that they'd want. And then we started going into protests, and then it becomes a different story altogether. Sure. They can't get enough people on the ground for the amount of work that was happening then. But for that interim period, I kind of started to go into events. I started to go into celebrity things and sports.
Okay.
And so once you start going into that, then you're moving around all over the place.
Right.
So I would go to China, to Japan, to Singapore, to anywhere, Macau and southern China, particularly. So in the year just before COVID, in that final year, you know, I did the World Cup basketball in China. I did the World Cup rugby in Japan.
Oh wow!
Which is just fabulous because you're away for 3 weeks at a time and traveling around. And I always have, from the moment I started, always, when I've been travelling for work, make the time to see where I am. Mm. So I'm not just going there to do the job.
Right.
Always go and see where I am.
For sure.
Whether it means you're definitely missing out on sleep, just go and see it.
Yeah.
Because you don't know if you're going to be able to go back and see it. And it's just such a fabulous opportunity. So Japan was just brilliant for the rugby.
Which is a sentence I wouldn't have expected to hear. If you're listening and you're hearing little feet, it's because one of your beautiful cats, what's his name?
That's Padme.
Padme. Okay,
Padme.
Her name. Yeah. Very nice. Just hopping around, doing everything. Awesome. So, on my laptop, I can see I don't think we have time to cover two more images, but one image is a blue sky. They're basically 1.5 centimeters. So I'm looking at it from far away. And one of them, it looks like a green ground. Of the two, which should we pick, or should we just pick randomly? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
The green one is rugby, and
so that perfect segue.
There we go.
There we go. Japanese rugby in Japan.
Ireland playing rugby in Japan.
Ireland. Okay, yeah. Good. So
rugby has been a real thing since I've come to Hong Kong. Did it for years. Mm-hmm. Back in Australia. In England, but in England, for the newspapers in England, one of the few specialities is sport.
Yeah.
So if you're doing sport, you're only doing sport.
Yeah.
But I was on the news side, and so my sport was literally just as an add-on. So when there's big events, they'll get another couple of photographers on.
Right.
Or if I was, for instance, with Australia, if Australia commissions you to do, say, the rugby league tour of Great Britain and France, then you're just doing it as the main photographer. So, but here it's really taken off. Mm-hmm. There's so many. There has been the Sevens, then we got the World Cup, but there's a lot of Asian competitions. They've been moving around the area, and I've just fallen into doing loads more of the rugby. So
so the image is this. In the background is a very, very blurry background of the stands with a kind of light blue, whatever it is, paneling, and then you've got the green of the grass, and then the field of focus comes over, and basically the one closest to the camera, it was in super sharp focus, is running with the rugby ball, and he is mid-step. He has the arm, the very dark arm. Which team are they playing against? Well, I don't know. There's an arm sort of latched on, holding onto his hip, while the guy is essentially falling, trying to drag him down. And there's a third, it's teams. So 2 guys in green, sort of Irish green shirts. And then one guy in between with some red shirt.
I think it's Japanese.
Oh, you think he's Japanese?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you pull up the emblem on his shirt.
Okay.
If that's the pink flowers of the Japan team.
Okay, let's see if I can. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. He's got a great haircut, because it's the kind of haircut that I have. But, okay. And what city was this in?
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Oh, no. Gosh. I did so much that I went to Osaka and to Yokohama and...
I'm not putting you on the spot.
I think that is Yokohama.
Okay.
So just outside Tokyo.
Okay.
And I know that it was the best game.
Okay.
Ireland were favourites. So it should have been, I was working for an Irish sports agency and there were two of us. They had their own Irish photographer that is employed by them the whole time and they flew him out and he was working for the actual Irish Rugby Union. So he had a different kind of list of things he had to get each day.
Right.
He travelled with the team. He was in the dressing room with the team, all this type of thing. And I was just then the field photographer to make sure that he'd come out at the last minute and then join me on the field. But it was the most spectacular game. Remember, the whole audience is virtually Japanese because they get advanced sales, ticket purchases. It's a Japanese game, so they really love rugby. So they really wanted to see Japan win. But Ireland were the favourites. And Japan were far from the favourites.
Right.
But the home team advantage with that crowd, Japan won.
Oh, wow.
And you just had to say it was the most spectacular thing.
Wow.
It was the best match that I saw the whole competition because the fans just went insane.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
That's amazing.
And Ireland realised how important this was to rugby.
Yeah.
And Japanese rugby.
Sure.
It was beyond who won and who lost. And then Ireland actually in the end didn't make it through.
Right.
But that was just spectacular.
Huh, cool.
The fans are 100%. They're like the South Stand without the costuming of the South Stand, but the enthusiasm of 100% into the rugby.
Wow. So, if you're shooting, offhand, what is the lens that you shoot when you're doing this kind of stuff? A 500 millimeter?
No, actually, because I'm not a full-time sports photographer, I've actually got a 200 to 400 zoom. Okay, 4K. Which then becomes a more versatile lens if I actually am doing some news. Yeah. So in the past, I did have a 500, but I had a manual 500 when I was, again, doing more. Right. But I can't justify it now. So at worst, I would put a 1.4 converter on it. Yeah. That's... which in the quality of newspapers and the quality of magazines, you just can't tell. Yeah. I wouldn't put a 2x converter on it. Yeah. The 2x converters are not up to scratch. Sure. There's something, they've never been able to get a 2.2x correct. I've upgraded the 1.4 several times. I'm onto the latest model all the time because it works perfectly. So for the people who aren't photographers who are listening, this is essentially you put a smaller lens. So let's say a 400 millimeter zoom, okay, goes up to 400 millimeters, which is a way of just narrowing the field so you can see really up close, like such as in this photograph. And the converter is a thing that you put between the lens and the camera body that is just a few centimeters thick. It looks almost like a hockey puck, only a little bit smaller. It's got some glass inside, and it, for example, turns the 400 to 800, 600? It's not 600. 600. Yeah, roughly 600. Right. The 2x would be 800. Yeah. Okay, so 600 millimeter. So what is it like? You get sent on these shoots. You go to Japan. Are you given a... well, I'm freelance. Okay, so it's on your own dime. So it's on my own dime and then I get paid. So, but, you don't go unless you've got a commission. Right. Obviously. And then the commission has to be, but you have to work out how you work out your expenses. Sure. You don't get the job necessarily if you charge them the actual cost of the expenses. Okay. So you don't also go just for one company. Right. So I've only gone to Japan because I've got out of that, I know that I've got a commission from the Irish Rugby and the Irish agency. I know I've got a commission from an agency in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. I know I've got avenues for Wales. Yeah. Wales is not a full commission. It's kind of a bit less. And England. Right. And then once you've got the access, so if you're there, then you're doing as many games as you possibly can. Right. And at that point, I also have agents that I send it to. Yeah. So anything that I've shot goes somewhere. But I've got a core expenses paid.
Sure.
So they're not seeing me putting in hotel bills. They're not seeing me putting in food bills. They're not seeing
it gets
any of
spread
that.
out. So
it gets spread out, and I have to at the end of it say I made the right amount of money.
Right.
I covered my expenses. I made the amount of money. And again, that's how I did the World Cup basketball in China as well. I go there. I only went there on the basis of having the commissions from various places.
Yeah.
And once it ticks over the right amount of commissions, then I go.
Okay. See, this is the it's also fascinating in its own way. Like, as a business consultant, which is what I do, I've spent a long time speaking with entrepreneurs and small, medium, large, huge companies. So it's, like Julia talked about how eventually moving into photography, and she really spoke as a business owner.
Mm.
And listening to you describe, do you want some water? Have some water.
That's right.
I want you to feel like this is your house.
Feel at home.
I want you to feel completely comfortable, like.
I think that is the major failing of education in photography.
Okay.
It is a business.
Yeah.
And if you don't run it as a business, you're shortchanging yourself.
And you're probably going to fail, or you're going to have. Well, one of the things.
But that is every time you go out for a job, it is not that you're spending 1 hour with that person.
Yeah.
It is spending 1 hour with that person, but you've taken $250,000 worth of gear out to that job.
Yeah.
You've insured yourself to make sure that anything that happens on that job is covered.
Sure.
So whether you gear or whether it's third party or whatever, you're covered to be there. You're then accommodating for the amount of time that it takes you once you get back.
Yeah.
It is your life.
Yeah.
So every hour that you take out of your life with your family has to be accounted for. Like any other job that you would turn up to an office for 8 hours and be paid for 8 hours. Just because my office is then back at my house for 2 hours of post-production or 1 hour of post-production, that is still my work.
It's
so
still
it has
time.
to still be accommodated for.
100%.
So when you're charging a client, that has to be all incorporated.
Yeah.
So that makes a big difference between the business, people that are in business, as opposed to young photographers that are starting out that are still living with mum and dad and have virtually no overheads.
But yeah, so
you have to, everything is accommodated in that.
Yeah. But so, with the Hong Kong bird in the background sending us off, we've covered the photos and everything. Like, I kind of like the ideas of what is failure, what is a setback, what is a nightmare. So can you think of a time where, as a business owner, as a photographer who does incredible images, but who's also essentially a small business of you, like you incorporated, where you're your own brand, can you describe a time that was really kind of difficult, almost painful, but you learned so much?
How's about 2020? The entire 2020.
Yeah.
I was always employed, full-time employed when I was in Australia.
Okay.
When I left and went to England, I was always freelance.
Oh, okay.
I did a couple of contracts for different newspapers, but basically they had overturned the whole business. They had virtually stripped their staff down to one sports photographer, one head news photographer.
Right.
And everyone else was freelance.
Uh-huh.
So you learnt very early in the piece that the only way to look after number one was make sure that you had some savings tucked away. So every time you're doing it, you've got to create the buffer. And that is, there's been several times, say 2008. 2008 happens, stock market crashes, Murdoch as a group of newspapers just says, and Sky News, suddenly everybody is cut. And it was so dramatic once that basically any single person that was not on staff was removed.
Wow.
So you've gone from 5 days work a week to 0.
Right.
And you have to really let the dust settle on something as big as the 2008.
Yeah.
For them to then turn around and start phoning you back again.
Yeah.
So that was, those types of times always remind you that it's really difficult.
as a last bit of advice that I could give and share. No, it's fine. Look, hi cats, how you doing?
Cats
As we're talking, the cats are now coming in over, stepping on everything. It's great. Last bit of advice that I would give from my work, as you know, in other businesses, that it's kind of like every startup is, you kind of have to invent your own or design. There's no kit that you kind of buy off the shelf and then plug it in and then there you go, it works, you know, as far as a small business. And in a way, I'm sure your evolution as a business owner, as a photographer, is kind of fits and starts of making mistakes, learning from them, and essentially crafting your own career. But somebody couldn't mimic you, you know what I mean? Like,
no, it's really hard, because if you've got, everyone has certain rules by which they'd operate.
Mm-hmm.
And straight away, it's antisocial, the hours.
Right.
Very antisocial.
Right.
And if you think that you will do a job and get a lovely lunch break and get a lovely dinner break and get a lovely time for a cup of coffee, you're dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
You work really intensely for X number of hours, but then you know the next day you're not. So it's an understanding of what the job entails.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a Monday to Friday 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
It is a Saturday night. It is a 15-hour day here. It's a 20-hour day the next, because you've done the shoot during the day, and then you've got to go post-production for something, you know, into the night, so it's ready for the next day or whatever. It's just the reality of the day-to-day.
And
but then on the other balance is, then you'll get another day where you're paid for a short job and it's done, and then you've got the rest of your day with your family.
And you're standing in front of the Queen.
Yeah.
Taking a photo, yes. Going like, this is different.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
For me, with newspapers and everything, the access to the most amazing things has been one of the big draws.
Right.
And that's not the celebrity side of it. It's also the side of lifting the rock effectively on society in the places that you live.
Right.
Because you could go about your business and just not notice.
Yeah.
Not have anything to do with any of this.
Yeah.
But because your job requires it, you end up in really unusual situations, places, and you get to see
one step removed of Snowden.
So much more.
Did you end up meeting Snowden or no?
No.
But it was like one step removed.
Yeah. They managed to get him out.
Wow.
So,
Whew.
Yeah.
Jayne.
Yeah, it's been very fascinating. I mean, I'd recommend it to anyone.
Well, yeah. Well, you delivered.
Absolutely. Anyone.
Oh,
but,
dude.
I mean, I've still got the press is still the huge thing.
Yeah.
Still obsessed with that.
Wow.
Still got the passion for that. But the money in Hong Kong, the jobs day to day, for me is more events.
Yeah.
Which obviously means zero
right now,
at the moment.
Yeah.
I do other things.
Sure.
So that's fine. But the big jobs I do are all events.
A big thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I love meeting people who do photography, and this is great.
Thank
Couple
you.
cup.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.